Hi, and welcome to this podcast in the Sleep Health channel under the Restonic Power of Sleep. Today is going to be on everything about melatonin. So what it is, how it's made, the disorders that you get if melatonin goes wrong, and also talking about taking melatonin as a replacement, when it's appropriate, what are the side effects, and all of the buzz about melatonin. Once again, we'd like to thank Restonic for sponsoring this podcast and joining us in the Sleep Health Center. So, melatonin, where does it come from? Importantly, melatonin is made in our brain. It's something that we make every night. It's a natural product. It's a hormone that wanders around and does all kinds of good stuff in our brain. It's made in a tiny little gland called the pineal gland, and it's only made when there is dim light. So we talk about melatonin having a dim light onset. And that is so when the sun goes down and light gets dim, then we start producing melatonin. And once it starts being produced in the brain, it actually goes quite quickly. So we get quite a nice big peak of melatonin. And then it goes down a little bit, but it stays higher than it would be right throughout the night and is really switched off by bright light in the morning. So when we wake up and there's bright light in the morning, the melatonin's gone. So it only happens at night. The dim light doesn't have to be pitch dark. That's not what we're talking about at all. We're talking about that the lights go down. There isn't as much light. The intensity of light has gone down. And as we'll talk about in a little while, that's where the whole business of screens and sleep comes in and why you need to limit the amount of screen time you have before you go to sleep. So normally melatonin would be produced about an hour and a half after that melatonin is produced. What it does is it doesn't make us sleepy directly. What it does is drop the body temperature a little bit. And that dropping in body temperature, that's what makes us sleepy. Now, the drop in body temperature is extremely important because the body temperature drops, and as the melatonin is high during the night, the body temperature stays low during the night and comes up in the morning at what would be our natural wake-up time. And that is going to be different for different people, but that is what melatonin does, drop the body temperature. And it is the creator of the circadian rhythms, which you may have heard of. So circadian rhythms talks about circa, which is about, and dian, day, about a day, 24-hour rhythms that we have in the body in virtually every single thing we can measure. But they all start with melatonin and the drop in body temperature, and then everything else kind of piles on. So, for example, during the night when melatonin is high and the body temperature is low, you will also have a low blood pressure. You will have a low pulse rate. You will also the gut will rest. And so I don't know if you've ever wondered why you can last for 8 hours at night without eating quite happily, but only 1.5 hours during the day before you need something to nibble. And that's because the gut is resting, so you don't feel hungry. And all kinds of things change. Cortisol, our big stress hormone, only starts coming up in the morning when the body temperature comes up. So it is also timed by melatonin. Most hormones are timed by melatonin. Things like platelet stickiness, the amount of urine that the kidney produces, pretty much everything you can measure in the body has a 24-hour rhythm. It doesn't mean that they all go down at night. Some of them go up at night. So, for example, growth hormone is only produced, as an adult, only produced in the first hour of sleep. So, but there's a definite timing to everything in the body. And that timing, and particularly the timing of sleep around that body temperature change, is what we call the phase of sleep. So it's the phase, where are you in time as far as your sleep is concerned? Now, as I mentioned, there are variations on this. And the big variation that I think everyone knows about is whether you're a lark or an owl. This tends to be a genetic trait, so it's not quite in the genes, but it's pretty much set for you once you're an adult. Larks are people who will need to go to bed at 9, 9:30 at night. They're major party poopers. They cannot stay up late at night. They get super grumpy if they stay up late at night. But they're up at 5 o'clock in the morning naturally, off to gym, making smoothies, doing all of that kind of stuff in the early morning. And that's the way they work. And they will always tell you that, for example, at university, if they're studying, that these are people who can study in the morning. They will wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning to study. Those are the larks. The owls on the opposite side. So owls are the people who can stay up at the party. They can stay up until 11, 12, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning really easily, but find it very difficult to wake up in the morning. And they are never going to be members of the 5 a.m. club at all. So they would much prefer to go to sleep at midnight and then sleep till about 7 or 8 in the morning. And those are natural tendencies. So being an owl or being a lark. And it's just the way you're born. This is kind of who you are. And what you'll find is you can beat that. I mean, obviously you can sleep at different times and force the system to be different. But your sleep is never going to be as good or as easy to get if you try to fight those natural body rhythms. So I always tell the story. I woke up at 5:30 every morning for 14 years to get my kids to school. But the day my youngest daughter got a car, I slept till 7. My natural wake-up time is 6:30 to 6:45, in that kind of zone. And going to sleep is about 11:30 at night. That's where my phase is. And I'm much happier if I sleep in that phase. So that's the phase of sleep. That's the larks versus the owls. The other thing that is important to understand about melatonin is that it changes over your lifespan. So melatonin comes in very young, so 1-2 years old is where melatonin starts to be produced. We think that it might be even earlier than that. So those of you who have young children will know that around 4 months of age, the babies start to sleep more at night and be awake more during the day. They start to drop their wake-ups at night. And by 6 months, most babies are capable of sleeping through the night. And so that may be where the first kind of inclination of melatonin and the circadian rhythms come in. So it's very early. The best melatonin you're ever going to have is when you're between 15 and 20 years old. You have really high melatonin levels. And then from then on, there's a slow decline as you go through adulthood. And at around 55 years of age is where we think that the melatonin drops to a level where it's no longer very useful. And beyond that, it just keeps on going. So there's again, the evidence that we have is over the age of 70, most people have no melatonin being produced in their heads at all. And you would say, well, if melatonin is that important, how do people still sleep if they don't have any melatonin? Well, if you have a really good sleep habit and you can sleep anywhere and it doesn't really matter, then you can carry on sleeping. And by that age, usually people have a very good habit. They'll go to bed at 10 and they'll get up at 6 every night. And so that habit is there. And so that keeps the sleep going. The other reason why you fall asleep is something called the homeostatic force. And it basically says the longer you stay awake, the sleepier you get. So you have that still. That is still there, but the melatonin isn't. But there are some people who are very dependent on their melatonin to be able to sleep. And when it starts dropping, start having trouble falling asleep. And the main way that you know that maybe that melatonin has gone is that you just don't feel sleepy at the right time anymore. So you used to feel super sleepy at 11 o'clock and it was really easy to fall asleep. And now you're going past 11, past 12 and you go, I'm just not sleepy. That may be an indication that your melatonin has gone or has dropped to a level which is too low for you. So that's the basics of melatonin. Now, if we look at the changes or disorders that can happen with melatonin, they really fall in two big groups. The first group is the group of disorders where the melatonin is completely normal. It's being produced, but it's being produced at the wrong time. And their sleep is completely normal, but sleep is happening at the wrong time. And so to give you an example of what we're going to talk about in that section, jet lag is a problem with normal melatonin at the wrong time, shift work, and then two disorders, which are medical disorders called advanced sleep phase and delayed sleep phase. Remember we said phase was about the timing of your sleep. So that's in group 1, where normal melatonin, wrong timing. The second group that we're going to talk about is where the melatonin is actually abnormal. And so therefore sleep is abnormal. And this includes people who have autism spectrum disorder, blind people, when you go to ICU or in hospital, Alzheimer's and elderly patients. They all, we have data for all of them that the melatonin may be abnormal. So let's start the first group. Normal melatonin, wrong timing. We start with jet lag. Jet lag wasn't a problem when we traveled everywhere in ships because it would take long enough. By the time we got somewhere else, we had adapted to the new time zone. And the rule of thumb is that it takes a day per hour of time zone to adapt. So if you're on a ship, it's going to take you 3 weeks to get from England to South Africa by ship, you're adapted. Okay. If you go across the Atlantic, it's going to take 3 weeks to get from London to New York. By the time you get there, you've adapted. Problem came in when we could fly. And so we can now fly from England or South Africa to New York, for example, and we have crossed 6 to 8 time zones, depending where you go. Let's pick 6 time zones. You've crossed 6 time zones in 12 hours. And that is not enough time to adapt to that new time zone. So when we get there to let's say New York. So when we get to New York and it's 11 o'clock our time and we are now sleepy, it is only 5 o'clock in the afternoon in New York. So the day is much longer if you travel west. And that's usually easy to adapt to. You just kind of go to bed a little bit earlier, but New York time. And then within a few days, you're okay. It's always easier to lengthen your day, to adapt to jet lag. The problem comes in is when you come back. So if you flying west is always easier. Flying east is the problem. So flying east, whether you're returning from the US or you are flying to Australia, those are both flying east. When you do the same thing and you come back across those 6 time zones, the big problem now is that your day, instead of being 24 hours, is now 18 hours. And so you're now trying to sleep at 11 o'clock New York time, which is actually 5 o'clock South Africa time. And so it's very difficult to be able to fall asleep. You only want to fall asleep much later, at night. And so your day is much shorter and it can be much harder to adapt to flying east. And that's where we use melatonin. So there's no point in using melatonin if you're going to fly west. It's when you're flying east and you have this much shorter day and you're not sleepy at the right time of the night. So it's 11 o'clock South Africa time and you're just not sleepy because you're actually going to be sleepy in another 6 hours time. So that's the problem, and that's where we use melatonin to try and adjust you faster into the new time zone. So the problem with jet lag is that for at least a day or so, you're going to be up at times when your body really should be sleeping. And what that does to you is obviously you're going to feel tired. So you're going to feel tired at a time when you want to be awake. So during the day. And they're not as tired as you need to be at night. So that's part of the problem. But the other problem is that you're going to be awake at times that you want to fall asleep. So there's 2 sides to that kind of coin. But also what we find is that part of jet lag is all the other circadian rhythms. So there's you trying to work during the day. Your blood pressure is low. Your pulse is low. Your cortisol is low. Your gut is not active. And you just feel a very good Afrikaans word that's called, just says nar. You just don't feel good, physically don't feel good. That's jet lag. Okay. So jet lag are the symptoms that you get when your current time zone is out of sync with your actual time zone. So because you have traveled too quickly. So we'll talk about melatonin replacement a little bit later, how much you use, when you use it, etc. But let's move on to shift work. Humans are not designed to do shift work. We are designed to be awake during the day and sleep at night, just as rats are designed to be asleep during the day and up at night. So that is how we're designed. And if we try to work shifts, we're always going to be working against the natural rhythms. Now, there are many different types of shift work. They can be 8-hour shifts. They can be 12-hour shifts. They can be standard night shifts for a week and then no shifts for a week and night shifts. But the most common routine is rotating shifts. So you would do 2 morning shifts, then 2 afternoon shifts, and then 2 night shifts, 2 days off, 2 morning, 2 afternoon, 2 night shifts. And so your body is moving through time zones, not slow enough to adapt to the time zones. But unfortunately, because light and dark is still happening at the same time, you are still stuck in the South Africa time zone. So it's a kind of thing that we say that you never actually adapt to night shift. You can't adapt to it because if you adapt to night shift, then the 2 days off, you have to stay on night shift, if that makes sense. So you have to stay awake at night and sleep during the day. And that never happens. So when people come off shifts, then they go back to day shift. And so that is why you never completely adapt to night shifts. So what you have is then a jet lag sensation. So you are working during the night. You're tired. And you're trying to work at a time when your body is really trying to sleep. And then when you come home, then you sleep during the day. And the data tells us that you never sleep as well during the day as you do at night. And usually you get an hour's less sleep during the day than you would at night. Importantly, if you are a shift worker, is to understand that it's useful to have your sleep when you get home. So that kind of night that you proper sleep, so 4 or 5 hours. And then if you can, to have a nap before you go on shift, because that'll just relieve some of the sleep pressure. Otherwise, you're awake for a long time before you go on shift, and then you are really tired again. So shift work, again, your melatonin is normal. It's being produced at the right time, but you have moved your sleep out of the zone where the melatonin is. The third component of this group is advanced sleep phase. So advanced sleep phase means that the phase of sleep is advanced. It is much sooner. Now, this is a lark thing. So there are larks who are normal. So 9 to 5 would be considered a normal kind of sleep. But if you're sleeping from 7 at night till 3 in the morning, that's more like advanced sleep phase. So it's just like an extended lark or a worse lark, if that makes sense. And the most common people who get this problem are elderly people, often who live in retirement homes. So generally what happens there is they will have dinner at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and they will go back they will have some activity, but by 7:30, they're pretty much back in their homes, often alone, and tired. And so they go to sleep. And then they wake up at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and often will go to doctors and say, please, will you give me something to help me sleep through the night? And if you don't take the proper history and they say, I'm waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning, most people would assume you're going to bed at 10 and waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning. And often they get given sleeping tablets at that point. But if you think about it, going to bed at 7 and waking up at 2, that is 7 hours of sleep. It's just very early in the evening. And often they'll say, I go to bed early because there's nothing nice on television. And then they wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and find there's really nothing nice on television at 2 o'clock in the morning. And so those are the people it usually happens in. And it's quite easy to move them back into the right time zone, because we just say to them, right, tonight you're not going to go to bed at 7:30, you're going to stay up until 8. And then do that for a couple of nights, and then you're going to stay up until 8:30. And then we gradually move their bedtime later and later, like half an hour every couple of nights, until they're in the right time zone. And the morning moves as well until it's in the right time zone. And then that's where we stay. We don't need to use melatonin for them. So that's advanced sleep phase. It's not common, and we don't see it as a problem in our practices very often. Delayed sleep phase, however, is very common. And so delayed sleep phase is the owls, but they're just much later. So an owl would be, let's say, 11:30 to 7 in the morning. That would be a natural owl. Delayed sleep phase is where you have people who can only fall asleep at 2 o'clock in the morning, but can sleep till 10. And you may recognize this as every teenage boy, right, on holiday who sleeps like that. And that's what they do, because it's easy for them to stay up. Every teenager has a natural shift of an hour later. So their sleep and everything shifts an hour later. And particularly during school holidays, particularly amongst boys, they stay up later because they can. So right now they'd be gaming or they'd be on social media, and they're up till 2 o'clock in the morning. Parents, when during the day say, they're on holiday, let them sleep until 11. And depending on who it is and their kind of genetic makeup, you may find that after a 5-week holiday during December, for example, when they now go back to school and they have to get up at 6 in the morning, they cannot go to sleep earlier. And so they are still falling asleep at 2 o'clock in the morning, but now they're getting up at 6. And so their sleep is really, really short. Weekends, they pack in huge amounts of sleep and often go to bed at 2 and wake up at 1 in the afternoon. So they catch up on the weekends and then have this very short sleep. But it's not sustainable. And we find that if it doesn't kick back in a week or so, it's not going to do it naturally. And so we then need to put them on a program that includes melatonin and bright light in the morning and move them back into the right time zone. So generally what we would do is, using that 1.5 hours of melatonin as being the important thing, is if the natural sleep is now at 2 o'clock in the morning, and that's easy to find because you go, when are you sleepy? Are you sleepy at 11 o'clock? And they go, not at all. When are you sleepy? At about 2 o'clock in the morning. Then we move them back to 1 o'clock by giving them melatonin an hour and a half before 1 o'clock, so at 11:30. And then moving in the morning when they wake up in the morning, lots of bright light to kind of push the sleep in the right direction. And we find it works extremely well. They have to be very strict about what they do. But within a couple of weeks, they're back into the right time zone. And then we keep them there with melatonin for a little while. And then generally we can stop using the melatonin after a month or so. But they will always be prone to sleeping later. So teenage boys are the standard, where it happens, teenager young men. But it also happens in people who do stay up late for various reasons. So, for example, people who work in restaurants. They're staying up until 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. Restaurant only opens at 12, so that's where they have their sleep much later than most other people would. Even people who work shifts in the hotel industry, so just shift work. If you do a lot of shift work, that can do it. If you do a lot of traveling across time zones, I have a sense in my head that you do a lot of traveling over time zones, and then the brain eventually just goes, I have no idea where I am right now. No idea when to make melatonin. No idea, are we in New York, Tokyo, India, where? I don't know where we are. And so you kind of lose that very powerful melatonin production at the right time. So those are the people who will usually get it. We find it in older people as well. So it's not just in teenagers. We find it in older people. So classically, it would be people who are working and who are studying as well. So classically, working and MBAs at the same time. And they're doing so much work at night. They're only getting to bed 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. And that's a 2-year kind of course. And after that, a lot of people find that they cannot move their sleep early. It's kind of set in stone. So that's called delayed sleep phase syndrome. It's really easy to find. As I said, these are people who present with insomnia. They will say, I have great difficulty falling asleep, and then it's really difficult for me to get up in the morning. And then you ask, when do you feel sleepy? And they go, oh, only very late, like at 2 o'clock in the morning. Often they're taking sleeping tablets before that to try and fall asleep earlier. So only 2 o'clock in the morning. And what about the morning? How late can you sleep in? And they go, well, if I don't have an alarm clock, I can sleep till 9. So if you look at that sleep, it's sitting there from 2 till 9, it's 7 hours of sleep. It's perfectly normal sleep. It's just at the wrong time of day. So they are living in New York, essentially. And so we move them back into the right time zone, and then often they're okay. So that's group 1, normal melatonin, wrong timing of sleep. So we've got jet lag. It's because we travel too quickly across time zones, shift work, advanced sleep phase where you're falling asleep much too early and waking up much too early, and then delayed sleep phase where you're going to bed much too late and waking up too late. Right. So that's group 1. Group 2, as I said, are those people who we have evidence now that their melatonin is abnormal. So if your melatonin is abnormal, your sleep is going to be abnormal. And the first group we're going to look there is people who are blind. So if you're blind and you cannot see the difference between light and day, so night and day, you can't see the dark of night and you can't see the light of day, then what that means is that signal of the dim light happening and the light during the day is not reaching the brain and therefore cannot control melatonin production. So because it's dark all the time, what we find is instead of having that nice big melatonin production at 9 o'clock in the evening, that there are little bits of melatonin running all day. And so the data would say that about 70% of people who are blind have difficulty with sleeping because their melatonin is just not in the right place. And so that's an obvious one, right? If you cannot see the light and dark, then the melatonin can't be controlled properly. But now we know that people who have autism spectrum disorder, so children who have autism spectrum disorder, are likely to have bad melatonin. It's just too low. It is compared to people who don't have autism spectrum disorder, it is always significantly lower. And many of them, so again, up to about 70% of children and adults with autism spectrum disorder have insomnia as well. Classically, difficulty falling asleep because there's no big surge, there's no big punch of melatonin at the beginning of the night, but often waking up in the middle of the night because there's no melatonin there. And so we know that that's a problem, and the easiest thing to do there is supplement with melatonin. But then hospital, ICU, I don't know if any of the listeners have been in hospital or ICU, but ICU is the worst. Hospital is a milder version of ICU. But in ICU, there is no night and day. Lights are on most of the time. There is no, let's everyone be quiet at night. I mean, you have people coming in, from surgery, for example, in the middle of the night. You have people having heart attacks in the middle of the night. You have all kinds of nonsense going on, lots of noise, all kinds of drama happening at any time. And so it can be extremely difficult to sleep in ICU. An interesting study, they took male medical students and they put them in an ICU, a simulated ICU. So they slept in an ICU and they had noises and they had nurses running around and they had the typical kind of ICU. And within 4 days, their sleep was gone. Within 4 days, they were not sleeping normally. So it's a well-known phenomenon. So what you have then is you end up having what it turns out the normal amount of sleep, but you're having a whole chunk during the day now. Sometimes as much as half is happening during the day. And then often patients are predicting that they still want to have their 8 hours at night, but they're not going to have 8 hours. If you've had 4 hours of sleep during the day, you're only going to have 4 hours of sleep at night. And so sleep gets very disrupted because of the lack of melatonin. Again, you don't have dark. You don't have dark at night to produce that big melatonin. Melatonin just runs at a low level the whole time. And so it's difficult to fall asleep. And then no one in ICU has not got pain, or they've got drips and they've got monitors and they've got all kinds of things which are also going to interfere with sleep. So it's never easy to sleep in ICU, and there's good data now that people who have been in ICU and have a sleep problem in ICU will often present with delirium, and that is where they go a little crazy. And it's not good, because if you do get delirium in ICU, you are likely to have more problems in ICU. You are likely to stay longer in ICU, and you are more likely to die if you go a little crazy from not sleeping. And that's a well-known thing as well, that if you don't sleep, and so a lot of people who did Guinness World Records would say that they were playing snooker, and the rule with Guinness World Records is you get 5 minutes per hour of rest. People kind of stack that up and take a little piece of sleep. But, 4 or 5 days later of only getting 3 hours of sleep a night, if you're playing snooker, those balls are looking remarkably like spiders. So it's a well-known phenomenon that you start to see stuff that's not there, start to get very paranoid, everyone's against you, that kind of thing. And you can understand that in an ICU scenario, often patients will say the nurse is stealing my pudding, or stuff is happening, and it's because they're sleep deprived. So we have some data that says if you're sleep deprived in ICU, more likely to have delirium, and that has significant consequences. So, and then if you move out of ICU and you move into a hospital bed, often you go into high care, where nurses are taking blood pressures at 2:00 in the morning, and there's still noises and there's still stuff carrying on, is that a lot of patients then leave hospital with a sleep disorder, which they didn't have when they came in. And it's important, if you do that, to actually get a handle on it very quickly, to sort it out, because if you leave hospital with a sleep disorder, it may be that it continues and you may need proper help. So that's hospital ICU, melatonin problems. Then depression. We know that melatonin changes if you have depression. And that is why some of the antidepressants that are used in patients with depression have melatonin, what we call melatonin agonists. They work on melatonin to increase the amount of melatonin, because we know that improves depression. So melatonin on its own does not improve depression, but if you have depression, then you have a low melatonin, and replacing that can often improve things. Then patients who have dementia or Alzheimer's, we know that the sleep disorder, they often get sleep disorders, and the sleep disorder that they're most likely to get is one of those advanced phase, delayed phase syndromes. So it's a circadian disorder, because not only do they have confusion, but they're also older. And if you're older, then your melatonin is low, and you often can't do the sleep hygiene, like have rigid bedtimes and wake-up times. You're often in bed for long periods of time, and so the whole circadian rhythm thing kind of falls apart. But even if we look at Alzheimer's patients versus normal elderly patients, Alzheimer's patients tend to have lower melatonin than normal elderly patients. Normal elderly patients also don't have much melatonin. So as I mentioned, it's around 55 years old that the melatonin level is going to drop. below what we consider to be effective melatonin level. In women, that coincides with menopause, so that's really a bad combo to put together. So hot flushes, low hormones, and low melatonin is really not a good thing for sleep, generally. But from then on, sleep is likely to be less dense, less deep, more fragmented, and harder for you to fall asleep if you really need a big sleepiness to be able to fall asleep because of this lower melatonin level. All right. So that's that second group. So second group, abnormal melatonin levels. We find it in blind people, autism spectrum disorder, hospital or ICU, depression, Alzheimer's, and elderly folk. And I'm sure we'll find other disorders where the melatonin is low. Importantly, melatonin is not measured routinely. You cannot get melatonin done at your standard pathology lab. The only way to measure melatonin is we measure it in spit, and is to take saliva. We don't know where it is, so it's somewhere in the 12 hours at night, that high peak of melatonin. It's somewhere. And so the only way to do that is to take saliva every 20 minutes. You take another sample every 20 minutes, and you keep going for 5 hours. By then you've got 20 samples, and then you test all of those samples, and then you might find where the melatonin is. So you can understand it's an extremely expensive test and can't really be done routinely on people. So nobody measures melatonin. We assume if you have autism spectrum disorder and a sleep problem that it may be because of the melatonin. So how do we use melatonin as a treatment? Now, the important thing to understand is that melatonin is now on script. You can't really get it over the counter. It sometimes is there. It shouldn't be over the counter. It should only be on script. It used to be over the counter. And people will remember when you could get melatonin really easily. And it is still over the counter in the USA, for example. And so a few European countries still allow melatonin to be obtained over the counter. But everywhere else in the world, it's on script. So it's not uniquely South African that it's on script. So you do need a script from your doctor to get melatonin. There's two big groups of melatonin that you can get. The registered melatonin, which is registered for patients over the age of 55. Although we do use it for children, we use it for anybody who needs melatonin. The original medication is called Circadin, obviously because of the circadian rhythms. So it's called Circadin. It's a 2 milligram tablet, and it's a prolonged release. So what that means is you drink it. It doesn't get released immediately. The structure of the tablet means that it takes a long time for that melatonin to come out, which is more like the natural melatonin rhythm. And so it lasts about 6 to 8 hours. So that's Circadin. There's now generics for Circadin, so you can still get Circadin. Then there is melatonin capsules that you can get on script. Those are not registered. They are made by a compounding pharmacy, usually, so a pharmacy that gets melatonin, raw melatonin, puts it in capsules. And it comes in all kinds of different sizes. So 1 milligram, 2 milligrams, 5 milligrams, 10 milligrams, etc. The rule of thumb is that if you are replacing melatonin in an older person, 2 milligrams is plenty. If you're replacing melatonin in a child, because normal child melatonin is much higher than it is in elderly people, then you often need a higher dose. So 4 milligrams, 5 milligrams. But that would be the maximum that you would need. Very occasionally, in very difficult children, we go up to 6 milligrams. But there is no benefit to taking 10 milligrams of melatonin or 15 milligrams of melatonin. No added benefit. Once you get into that zone of 10, 15 milligrams, it becomes like taking any kind of sedative to be able to fall asleep. But you're flooding the brain with melatonin, and the brain does not need that much melatonin. There's no question that melatonin does other things apart from sleep. So people often will take a high dose of melatonin because they will say it is anti-aging, it is anti-inflammatory, it's anti-this, and it's going to make me live longer. And that is true. Melatonin does have those effects, but it has those effects at 2 milligrams and 4 milligrams as well. And increasing the dose does not make it better at doing that kind of job. So those are the two types of melatonins. You do need a script from your doctor. And melatonin should only be taken under medical supervision, because it is for specific things only. It's really important that if you have insomnia, that you don't just use melatonin even if there's no evidence of these particular disorders. So if there's no evidence of these disorders and you're taking melatonin to try and fix insomnia, there's a good chance it's not going to work because it's not a sedative. It's not going to override whatever else is happening. It definitely can make you more sleepy, and if that's your problem, it can do that. But it should be used in particular circumstances where we know it's most likely to work. So when we look at these two groups that we have of disorders, in group 1, where you might have jet lag or you have delayed sleep phase, those are the two kind of situations where you would use melatonin supplements. It's for a short term. So jet lag, you would use it for 3 or 4 days when you're flying east, just to adjust more quickly to the new time zone. And in delayed sleep phase, you would use it for a week or so to get into the right time zone. We usually keep people on melatonin then for a month or 2 after that to just make sure it's there, it stays there, and then we take them off. Importantly, to take it an hour and a half before the intended bedtime, the way you want the bedtime to be. Really important that you cannot do anything you like. So you cannot say, my bedtime is currently at 2 a.m. I want it to be at 9, so I'm going to take the melatonin at 7:30. I can tell you, well, in my cartoon of the brain, that the brain is sitting there watching you taking melatonin at 7:30 when it can only fall asleep at 2 a.m. and kind of going, I don't know what you think that's going to do, because that's a waste of time. You can only take melatonin and move by an hour at a time. So it would be to 1 o'clock and then taking the melatonin at 11:30. So I get a lot of patients who come and see me and they tell me that they've tried melatonin and melatonin didn't work. And I'll say to them, when did you take it? When did you take it? And they'll say much earlier than they should have taken it. And that's why it doesn't work. So let's not set melatonin up to fail by taking it too early compared to where you need to take it. The people in group 2, so those people who have abnormal melatonin, the melatonin is not coming back. So if you have somebody who has autism spectrum disorder and you give them melatonin and they're sleeping beautifully, if you take away that melatonin, the problem comes back because the melatonin is not going to suddenly now be produced. And so in that second group of people, that is where melatonin is used long term. If you're an older person and you can't sleep and you sleep beautifully on melatonin, then you're going to take melatonin. You're going to carry on taking melatonin for the rest of your life, potentially. And so that's where we start getting problems and people saying, but what is it safe to take melatonin? So let's look at the safety of melatonin. There's no question that if you're taking 2 milligrams of melatonin and you're using it for the short term, so for jet lag, or you're using it for delayed sleep phase syndrome, that is safe. Melatonin itself is inherently safe. They used it during COVID as an anti-inflammatory to try and prevent people from getting extremely ill. And they were giving doses of 30 milligrams of melatonin a day with no side effects. So it's very true. You can take high doses and there are very few side effects. But important to understand that it's not just about the lack of side effects. There is an effect of the melatonin that you're having, and that may have consequences in the long term. There are some people who get side effects directly from melatonin. So the major side effect from circadian, because it's long acting, is that they wake up and still feel groggy the next morning because it's working a little bit too long. And if the main reason why you're taking the circadian is to be able to fall asleep, then often by chewing the tablet and making it a fast release tablet, you can get the same effect without the grogginess in the morning. So that can be done. The other side effects that you can get, in some people, melatonin wakes them up. It doesn't make them sleepy. They get more awake, and so they have the reverse effect. And then some people get nightmares when they take melatonin. And that can be very disruptive. And I have a number of patients who go, I get such bad nightmares, I don't want to take it anymore. And so those are the major side effects we get with melatonin. The long-term side effects are tricky because nobody has really done studies on taking melatonin for 20 years and does it have any long-term side effects. Where we're concerned about melatonin long-term side effects are not the sleep issues, because actually it's good for sleep, it's good for the brain, But are there any effects on other organs, for example? So in animals, and I'm going to stress this, in animals, melatonin is very important for the reproductive system. There's no real evidence that it is important for the reproductive system in humans, but it is obviously a concern because we haven't measured it. So we don't know about giving melatonin to a young child, let's say 8. Is it going to have any impact on puberty, delayed puberty or faster puberty? Is it going to have and we don't know the answers to those questions. So it's important to say we don't know the answers. Doesn't mean that doesn't happen. It means we don't know. There's not full-blown long-term side effects from melatonin because people have been taking it for years and years and years and are perfectly fine. So there's no known really side effects. It doesn't cause dementia. If anything, it might prevent dementia. It doesn't cause depression. Giving it might improve depression. So everything that we would look at, there's certainly no effect on kidneys or liver or anything like that. Effects on kidneys and liver as far as medication is concerned is usually because there's a lot of medication. You're taking a lot of different types of medication. That's where it may be the last straw, and adding melatonin to a list of another 11 medications may actually have an impact. But it's not the melatonin, it's everything else that's included there. So we don't know about the long-term side effects, but we do know that the long-term side effects of not sleeping are quite substantial. And so when we look at, and every medication that we give patients, we should look at the risk versus the benefits. And in the case of melatonin, if you are not sleepy and you're tired during the day, the risks of taking melatonin long-term versus the risks of not sleeping, there's no discussion here. The risks of not sleeping are far outweigh the risks of taking melatonin. And so we would always advise, if you're not sleeping and melatonin fixes your sleep and you sleep very well on it, then rather take melatonin and sleep properly because there are major benefits to that long term. So that's everything about melatonin. It's not everything. Obviously, the whole book's written about melatonin, but I'm hoping that is enough information to help you use melatonin properly, to ask for melatonin if you are in that second group of patients and you're not sleeping well and you've never thought that it might be melatonin related. Please go discuss that with your doctor and try some melatonin because you might find it substantially improves your sleep. I hope that was useful. And I hope you now understand how melatonin works in both children and adolescents and the elderly. And we look forward to you listening to our next podcast. And thank you very much for listening. And once again, thank you to Restonic for the sponsorship.
You've been listening to another production from Solid Gold Podcasts.